There are places in Igbo land where the river does not feel empty. You can stand at the edge, hear nothing but insects, see nothing but water, and still feel watched. Not hunted, not threatened, watched. And in many Igbo communities, that presence has a name. Nne Mmiri, Mother of Water. But before we romanticize her, before we turn her into a mermaid, before we reduce her to folklore, we have to understand something. Water in Igbo cosmology is not decoration. It is power. And power is never casual. Nne means mother. Mmiri means water. Simple translation. But translation is never the whole story. Mother does not mean soft. Mother means origin, source, authority. Nne Mmiri is not just a spirit that lives in water. She represents the consciousness of water. And in Igbo belief systems, every element has consciousness. Land, fire, wind, water. They are not objects, they are forces. In Igbo cosmology, the universe is structured. There is Chukwu, the supreme source. There are Alusi, spiritual forces governing natural domains. There is Chi, the individual spiritual identity. And within that system, rivers are not neutral spaces. They are inhabited, protected, respected. Major rivers often had shrines, offerings, priestesses, community boundaries. This was not random superstition. It was ecological respect encoded as spirituality. If you treat water as sacred, you protect it. If you believe something lives in it, you don't pollute it. Spiritual belief was environmental law.
Let me translate that into modern terms. If you think a goddess lives in your river, you're not throwing trash in it, you're not disrespecting it, you're not overfishing it. Spiritual belief was sustainability before sustainability was a hashtag.
Exactly. And that's important, because when colonial narratives later labeled water spirits as primitive superstition, they ignored the structure behind it. This wasn't chaos, it was order. When Europeans encountered West African water deities, they reframed them. They compared them to sirens, mermaids, temptresses. They exoticized what they did not understand. But Nne Mmiri was not originally about seduction. She was about balance, flow, exchange, life. Rivers were trade routes. Trade routes meant wealth, so water spirits became associated with prosperity. Coral beads, jewelry, adornment. But symbolism got flattened, and flattening removes depth. Let's step away from theology for a second. Why does deep water make people uncomfortable? Because you cannot see the bottom. Humans fear what they cannot measure. Water reflects the sky, but hides its depth. It mirrors you while concealing itself. Psychologically, water represents the subconscious, emotion, memory, unprocessed experience. So when cultures personify water as feminine, they are not being irrational. They are recognizing something intuitive. Depth creates power, and power demands respect.
Across cultures, water symbolism consistently aligns with fertility, emotion, transition, and the unconscious. Personification of water allows communities to externalize abstract psychological forces. In Igbo cosmology, this personification integrates seamlessly into spiritual hierarchy. Conclusion: Nne Mmiri operates simultaneously as environmental guardian, psychological metaphor, and spiritual entity.
That's the part people struggle with. It can be more than one thing: spiritual, symbolic, psychological, cultural, simultaneously. Igbo cosmology does not separate those categories. Western systems do. Ask elders in southeastern Nigeria. They will tell you certain rivers feel heavier, certain sections feel forbidden. Children are warned not to mock water, not to urinate in sacred streams, not to shout disrespectfully near shrines. Why? Because presence is believed to respond. And even if you do not share the belief, respecting the river still protects you. That's layered intelligence. There is an oral account of a young boy who mocked a shrine near a riverbank. He fell ill days later. Was it coincidence? Possibly, but the community interpreted it as correction. Offerings were made, the illness resolved, the lesson remained. Respect what sustains you, whether spiritual or ecological. So Act 1 is not about proving whether Nne Mmiri is physically visible. It is about understanding the framework she lives in. A system where nature is conscious, where water has identity, where depth is feminine, where flow equals power. And here is the truth. When a culture calls something mother, it is not minimizing it. It is recognizing its authority. And in Igbo land, water holds authority. But we haven't touched the part that unsettles people yet, because Act 2 is about what happens when the river chooses someone. Not everyone stands at the river and feels chosen. Most people feel nothing. Some feel peace. A few feel something else, a pull, a repetition, a dream that won't stop replaying. And in Igbo cosmology, repetition is not random. Repetition is intention. When something returns again and again, it is trying to be understood. And sometimes it is trying to be answered. Many stories of Nne Mmiri begin in sleep. A woman dressed in white, standing in water that does not ripple. She does not chase. She does not threaten. She simply watches. Sometimes she offers coral beads. Sometimes she offers a mirror. Sometimes she says nothing at all. And then the dream repeats, again and again and again. Now here is where Igbo cosmology differs from modern dismissal. Dreams are not automatically nonsense. They are messages filtered through symbolism. And when symbolism repeats, it demands interpretation.
Let's break this down. If you keep dreaming about water, that might be your subconscious saying, you have emotions you're not dealing with. Or, within Igbo cosmology, it might mean there is alignment waiting for you. Either way, you don't ignore repetition. Repetition is either psychology knocking or spirituality knocking, but somebody is at the door.
And in traditional communities, that door was not ignored. Families would consult a dibia. Divination would be performed, not out of fear, but out of alignment. Because the belief was simple. If a spiritual force calls you and you resist, your life becomes misaligned. There are oral accounts of people who became chronically unwell. Fatigue, strange episodes, unexplainable distress. Doctors could not identify a cause. Traditional healers initially struggled until divination revealed something unexpected. The river wants her. Now pause. Was it psychosomatic stress? Was it identity conflict manifesting in the body? Possibly. But in Igbo cosmology, the body reflects spiritual imbalance. If your chi is misaligned, your body carries tension. And once the individual accepted ritual initiation, the symptoms reportedly ceased.
Psychological distress can produce measurable physical symptoms. When a culturally meaningful ritual provides resolution, the nervous system stabilizes, cortisol decreases, symptoms improve. The interpretation may be spiritual. The physiological effect remains biological. Conclusion: meaning regulates the body.
Meaning regulates the body. That line is important because whether you interpret Nne Mmiri literally or symbolically, the impact of belief is real. So what happens when someone accepts the calling? In some Igbo communities, the process includes ritual bathing, white garments, offerings to the river, temporary seclusion, instruction, discipline. This is not about possession. It is about recognition. You are not being owned. You are being aligned. After initiation, stories often describe heightened intuition, magnetic presence, unexpected financial flow. But there are rules, boundaries, codes of conduct. Water spirits demand discipline. If neglected, imbalance returns. Across West Africa, water spirits are frequently associated with wealth, coral beads, jewelry, adornment. Why? Because rivers historically meant trade, trade meant exchange, exchange meant prosperity. If you control the river, you control the route. If you control the route, you control wealth. Symbolically, Nne Mmiri represents flow. Money flows, opportunity flows, destiny flows. And when flow is blocked, life feels stagnant.
So, basically, if Nne Mmiri is on your side, your life moves. If she isn't, you're spiritually buffering, and nobody likes buffering.
He had to say it like that. But he's not wrong. Flow is life. Stagnation is distress. And the river teaches that naturally. Now we address the part that makes people uncomfortable. There are stories of individuals who rejected the calling, who avoided rivers, who dismissed dreams, and later experienced disruption. Some accounts describe mental distress interpreted as spiritual resistance. Colonial narratives exaggerated these stories into horror. But even within Igbo tradition, water spirits are not purely gentle. They are powerful, and power requires respect. This is not fantasy. This is cosmology with consequence. An elder once described a woman who repeatedly rejected initiation. She married, moved inland, avoided water. Years later, during drought, she returned home. She approached the river reluctantly, collapsed. When she awoke, she agreed to ritual. Her unexplained ailments reportedly stopped. Interpretation depends on worldview, but the community saw alignment restored. Let's stay grounded. The calling of Nne Mmiri may represent a woman stepping into personal authority, a confrontation with emotional depth, a refusal to live shallow. Water is depth. To enter water is to confront yourself. So when someone dreams of being submerged, it may not be seduction. It may be transformation. And Igbo cosmology does not separate transformation from spirit. They coexist.
Integrated cosmologies reduce separation between psychological and spiritual interpretation. When transformation is culturally validated, isolation decreases, community support increases, outcome stability improves. Conclusion: the system reinforces healing.
And that may be the most overlooked part. Nne Mmiri is not chaos. She is structure, depth, alignment. But in Act 3, we must address how her image was reshaped. Because what the world calls Mommy Wata today is not the full story. Something happened to Nne Mmiri, not to her existence, but to her image, because when Europeans encountered West African water deities, they did not see cosmology. They saw mythology to categorize. They saw symbolism to flatten. They saw power to exoticize. And Nne Mmiri became something else. She became Mommy Wata, and that shift matters. The term Mommy Wata gained popularity through colonial accounts, missionary records, and later urban folklore. It transformed localized water deities into a generalized figure, often depicted as a beautiful woman with long flowing hair, sometimes half fish, surrounded by wealth, tempting men, luring them. Now pause. Temptress narratives were not central to traditional Igbo cosmology. That was projection. European sailors already had myths of sirens, so when they saw African water reverence, they translated it into what they already knew. But translation is not neutral. Translation carries bias.
So, let me get this straight. European sailors already believed in dangerous water women. They arrive in West Africa, see powerful river priestesses, and say, "Ah yes, Same thing. That's not translation. That's copy-paste theology.
Exactly. Cultural frameworks were imposed onto systems that functioned differently. And once that happened, the image shifted. The Mami Wata figure became increasingly sexualized in colonial imagery. Paintings showed her as seductive, alluring, dangerous, wealth-obsessed. But within Igbo cosmology, adornment symbolized prosperity, not vanity. Coral beads symbolized status and trade, not seduction. Gold symbolized exchange and abundance, not greed. The reinterpretation altered the narrative from sacred authority to mystical temptation. Distortion is not harmless. When you flatten a spiritual system into fantasy, you remove its structure. You remove its environmental wisdom. You remove its gender balance. Nne Mmiri was not isolated. She existed within a cosmological network, Chukwu, Alusi, ancestors, Chi, community. But Mami Wata became spectacle, detached from system, detached from accountability, detached from cultural context. And when something loses context, it loses depth.
Cultural distortion occurs when external observers reinterpret belief systems through pre-existing frameworks. This process simplifies complexity. Over time, simplified narratives replace original structures. Data loss becomes tradition. Conclusion: modern Mami Wata imagery reflects colonial filtering rather than indigenous cosmology.
Data loss becomes tradition. That's powerful. Because generations later, many people think the distorted version is the original. In the 20th century, Mami Wata evolved again. Urban legends spread across West and Central Africa. Stories of wealth in exchange for loyalty. Stories of contracts. Stories of disappearing spouses. These narratives reflect modern anxieties: rapid urbanization, migration, economic pressure. The spirit adapted in storytelling, but at her core, the original Nne Mmiri was not transactional greed. She was flow, balance, exchange, power with discipline.
Every era reshapes its spirits. If you're in a trade-based village, water means commerce. If you're in a city struggling with capitalism, water means contracts and wealth anxiety. Spirits don't change. Context does.
And that's the nuance. Nne Mmiri did not become corrupted. The narrative around her evolved, sometimes organically, sometimes through distortion. There is another layer we must address. Colonial systems were deeply patriarchal. Female-centered spiritual authority threatened that structure. River priestesses held influence, economic roles, spiritual decision-making power. So reframing water spirits as seductive dangers diminished their authority. It reduced reverence to suspicion, and suspicion reduces power. Strip away distortion, remove spectacle, remove exotic fantasy. What remains? Water as life source, water as trade route, water as emotional depth, water as feminine authority, water as subconscious mirror. That is Nne Mmiri, not cartoon, not seductress, not superstition. Structure, power, flow. But we are not finished, because Act 4 is about what happens in modern identity when people reclaim her, and what that reclamation reveals about us today. Something has been happening quietly across Nigeria, across the diaspora, across the internet. People are revisiting what was once dismissed, not blindly, not recklessly, but curiously. They are asking, who was Nne Mmiri before she was distorted? What did she mean before she was sexualized? What does she mean now? And this is not about abandoning modernity. It is about reclaiming memory. For many in the diaspora, reconnecting with ancestral spirituality is not about ritual performance. It is about psychological grounding. When colonization interrupted cosmology, it created rupture. When rupture happens, identity fragments. So reclaiming Nne Mmiri is not about summoning spirits. It is about restoring continuity. Water becomes metaphor again. Flow becomes healing. Depth becomes strength.
Let's say it plainly. When people reclaim ancestral symbols, they are trying to answer one question: where do I belong? Water doesn't just represent wealth, it represents origin. We all started in water, before birth, before language, before history. So reconnecting with water symbolism, that's primal.
Exactly. The river becomes psychological return, not regression, return. There is another layer to this reclamation. Many young women are revisiting Nne Mmiri not as myth, but as archetype. The archetype of the woman who owns her depth, who refuses to be shallow for comfort, who understands her emotional power, who protects her flow. In modern language, we call that boundaries. In Igbo cosmology, that was discipline under spiritual alignment. Same concept, different vocabulary.
Archetypal reclamation allows modern individuals to reinterpret historical symbols in psychologically adaptive ways. When an archetype aligns with empowerment rather than fear, self-perception stabilizes. Reframing reduces inherited shame. Conclusion: symbol reclamation can function as identity repair.
Identity repair. That is what this is about. Not superstition, not fantasy, repair. Water does something neurologically. The sound of flowing water reduces stress response. The visual movement regulates breathing. The body relaxes. That's biology. Now imagine a culture that encoded reverence for water into daily life. Ritual bathing, river gatherings, seasonal ceremonies. That wasn't primitive. That was nervous system regulation through cosmology. Nne Mmiri becomes more than deity. She becomes embodied calm, embodied depth, embodied flow. Now here is where we stay responsible. Reclaiming does not mean rewriting history. Not every river experience is spiritual. Not every dream is calling. Not every hardship is destiny. Discernment matters. Traditional Igbo systems had structure, priesthood, divination protocols, community checks. Modern reinterpretation without structure can become projection. So balance is key. Respect the system without sensationalizing it.
Translation for 2026. Don't start calling yourself River Queen because you like ocean waves. There was structure. There were elders. There was accountability. Ancestral systems were organized, not aesthetic.
Thank you. That needed to be said. To reclaim Nne Mmiri today is not to perform ritual blindly. It is to understand. Water is life. Depth is strength. Flow is necessary. Discipline protects power. And feminine authority is not new. It is ancestral. When you understand that, the distortion loses its grip. The spectacle fades. The system reappears. And what remains is dignity. If you have ever felt drawn to rivers, if you have ever needed silence near water, if you have ever felt like your emotions run deeper than people understand, that does not mean you are called. It may simply mean you are aware of your depth. And depth is not weakness. Depth is capacity. The river does not shout. It moves steadily. That is power. But we are not finished, because Act 5 is where we answer the question everyone is quietly asking. Is Nne Mmiri literal, symbolic, psychological, or something else entirely? And the answer might not be one thing. So, now we arrive at the question. Is Nne Mmiri literal? Is she symbolic? Is she psychological? Is she myth? The honest answer? It depends on the framework you're standing in. And that doesn't weaken her. It expands her. Within traditional Igbo cosmology, Nne Mmiri is real, not metaphor, not imagination, a spiritual force connected to water, operating within a structured hierarchy of existence. In that system, spirits are not fantasy, they are layers of reality. Visible and invisible worlds overlap. Just because something is unseen does not mean it is absent. And for communities who live within that cosmology, that framework works. It regulates behavior, protects environment, maintains discipline, reserves balance.
Human perception operates within interpretive frameworks. If a belief system produces stability, ethical behavior, and ecological protection, its functional validity is measurable. Literal interpretation is not required for cultural effectiveness. Conclusion: reality is filtered through structure.
Reality is filtered through structure. Exactly. Now step into a psychological lens. Water represents emotion, memory, depth, the unconscious. Nne Mmiri becomes archetype, the embodiment of feminine depth, the part of you that refuses to be shallow, the part of you that demands discipline, the part of you that understands flow. From this view, the river calling you is your own subconscious asking for alignment, and that interpretation also works. It produces healing, integration, awareness.
Here's what I love. Both frameworks say the same thing in different languages. Respect depth. Respect flow. Don't pollute what sustains you. Don't ignore what keeps repeating. That's wisdom. Whether you call it spirit or psyche.
Exactly. The languages differ. The lesson remains. Here is where things get uncomfortable for modern minds. What if it is not either or? What if symbolic interpretation and spiritual interpretation are not enemies? Igbo cosmology does not fragment reality into strict compartments. Spirit and psychology overlap. Community and cosmology overlap. Environment and ethics overlap. So asking whether Nne Mmiri is literal or symbolic may be the wrong question. The better question is, what does the river require of you? Respect, discipline, depth, alignment. Because regardless of framework, those requirements remain consistent. Nne Mmiri survived distortion. She survived colonial filtering. She survived urban myth. She survived modernization. Why? Because water never stopped existing. Every generation still stands at rivers. Every generation still dreams. Every generation still fears depth. Every generation still seeks flow. The archetype survives. So here is the grounding truth. You do not need to fear water spirits. You do not need to romanticize them. You do not need to perform rituals you do not understand. But you should understand the structure, because within that structure lives environmental wisdom, psychological intelligence, gender balance, spiritual discipline. Nne Mmiri is not chaos. She is alignment. And alignment feels powerful because it is. If you stand at a river and feel nothing, that is fine. If you stand at a river and feel calm, that is fine. If you stand at a river and feel depth, that is fine. The river does not demand belief. It demands respect. And that might be the most important lesson of all. Water gives life. Water reflects truth. Water moves around obstacles without losing direction. That is power. That is feminine authority. That is ancestral intelligence. And whether you call her Nne Mmiri or simply call her water, the lesson remains. Protect what sustains you, respect what runs deep, and never underestimate the power of flow.